I have noticed when I listen to my video of this podcast, it always sounds very funky at the beginning, like I'm screaming. So I'm trying to speak very even so I don't create this distortion at the beginning. I hope it works. Fingers crossed, both fingers crossed. Lisa, hi, Lisa. For those of you that are on YouTube, that's nobody. But should someday somebody simultaneously, I'm on Facebook communicating with people who are participating and interacting. So you on YouTube, you're not getting that. But when you hear me talking to people that aren't there, they are there. They're just not here with you on this screen. They're here on this screen on Facebook. So I just wanted you people on YouTube to know that. For you people here on Facebook, I'm podcasting on YouTube. You can check it out or send some friend over there to listen anytime. So, hi, Debbie Kathy Rose. Yes, it must be 6:01 p.m. How do I know that? Here's how I know it. Two distinct issues. One, I'm here and starting my podcast at 6 p.m. most nights. Two, I have a clock on my computer that tells me the time. So, thank you for clearing up. I couldn't understand why I was missing things. You're going to miss things anyways, girl. All right? Oh, snap. Oh, wait. 3 snaps and a circle, baby. All right. So, listen, I thought about it. And when I think, it's always dangerous. But today is the beginning of the, oh, look at the little kitty cat in the background. You know what, Rose? Thank you. This shirt's probably older than you are. I think this shirt was stitched in the 50s. Hi, Rachel. So, on with the podcast. So, when you look at today's links, you may or may not catch on to a theme. So, I'm going to guide you through the theme. I think we've started the George Floyd trial. When we talk about the George Floyd trial, we are referring to the trial of the police officer that kneeled on his neck until he died. And now that trial's been interrupted. There's some significant legal issues they're debating. So it's interrupted, but it goes on, it gets interrupted. But I thought in honor of that trial, that the moment in history, it'd be nice to kind of stroll down Revolution Lane, right? So towards that end, I posted some, I would consider them songs about rebellion. The first one was Fuck the Police. The next one, if you've never heard it, The Last Poets. And by the way, I've been a fan of The Last Poets. Well, I started listening to them when I was 15, 16 years old. So I don't know what they've done lately, but their first album never gets old. Okay. Tricky is a really good performer. I assume it's the Tricky refers to. I've got Tricky albums, and Evolution, Revolution, Love is kind of cool. And then, of course, Gil Scott Heron, the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will be live. You all know that one, too. That played in mainstream media, if I recall correctly. Played in my mainstream media. So Tricky is the one that you probably are least familiar with. You may not know Fuck the Police by NWA, but you know who NWA was. You know Dr. Dre and Ice Cube and them were part of that. That's just, everybody kind of seems to know that. But Tricky. Take it tonight. Now that you got it right.
Coming off a dinner, who's a flex? He needs to pay for sex. When you drop it down, who is the calm? Never spill, who would you kill?
So if you're not acquainted with Tricky, now is going to be your opportunity to get acquainted. So I'm back. I had to go listen to Tricky doing Evolution, Revolution, Love. And then I thought about that title and I thought, man, that's a really good title for a podcast. It may have nothing to do with the podcast, as most titles I give my podcast frequently, generally even, have little relationship to what I actually land up talking about. Usually it's more tied to the music. And as you already know, those of you who have been fairly loyal and listening to the podcast almost always has nothing to do with the music. But the George Floyd trial is pretty significant in the history of the United States. We've got it started a movement. It burned the country. The burn burned out, probably due to the fact that infiltrators used it for cover to loot and to commit arson. And so they stole the thunder. They robbed an important movement of its momentum, and we can lament that till the cows come home. It won't change anything. But it did enhance the awareness for a period of time, and that period of time should be recognized historically. Should be recognized. It was pretty incredible that the United States, in large measure, not everywhere, of course, but in a lot of urban environments, it reacted to the tape of the killing, and it really stimulated a lot of conversation. Sadly, I say this with reluctance, the looting and the burning, which I don't believe were being committed by persons who were organizing the protest, and most of the people who attended the protest. Personally, I don't know who did the looting and burning. I'm just telling you my suspicions. So, back to daily events. So the trial, they're starting to pick a jury. They are going to have a hell of a time picking a jury. Let's talk about that. Jury selection is significant when you are going to trial. I can speak as a defense attorney, having picked a number of juries. It's a tricky deal. You don't want to get people on. You can't pick people going to vote for you, because neither side can ask, well, if this goes to trial, are you going to vote to convict, or are you going to vote to acquit, right? And if you did that, you wouldn't be cool anyways, because if they said, well, I'm going to vote to acquit, the other side would knock them off. They said, I'm going to vote to convict, I would knock them off, right? So that's not going to happen. So when you're picking a jury, you're trying the best of your ability, if the judge allows it, to discern what are the inclinations of a person you've never met. You can't have a normal conversation with. The best you can do is, one, you can submit questions to a judge that sometimes can be answered in advance, and sometimes only by the judge during the voir dire, which is the selection of the jury. Hey, Mark and Ann. But sometimes in some jurisdictions, the judge will allow the attorneys to ask all the questions or a lot of the questions. And it's terrifying. It's freaking terrifying. So imagine you take a case where prison's likely, if you lose, and they bring in typically for a normal trial, they might bring in about 30 people, right? For the George Floyd, I think it's Officer Chauvin, I don't know, they'll bring in probably hundreds of persons will be called up for jury duty for that one case. Now, only 14 will be selected. 12 will be selected as the jurors, and 2 will be selected as alternatives. Perhaps they could do more alternate jurors. I'm not paying attention to that. So you're sitting there and you want to know, And the path to identifying somebody's inclinations or biases, or prejudices, is you got to come up with some questions that aren't going to get you in trouble with the judge or the prosecutor. You can ask, what magazines do you read? Well, if they're reading scientific journals, tells you something. If they're reading People magazine, tells you something. If they're reading Mother Jones, tells you a lot, right? If they're reading the National Review, it tells you something. So you can ask stuff like that. You might think that by asking, what car does somebody drive? What do they do for a living? How long have they been at their job? Um, you know, the prosecution always asks, have you ever been in trouble with the police in a criminal trial? They always ask that. And if you've been in trouble with the police, you're probably going to be asked, so what did you think of that? And you're probably going to have a negative experience, and they're going to kick you off the jury for cause. The judge is always asking, can you still be fair and impartial? And the problem with that question is very few people want to sit there in front of other people and go, yeah, no, I can't be fair and impartial. Are we going to have riots during this? Debbie's asking. I don't know. I'm so far removed from where this happened. It's not nowhere near me. Obviously, they anticipate there's going to be trouble, primarily if he's acquitted, if the police officer's acquitted. So I think that they may have riots there. I don't think it's going to permeate the population like the killing of George Floyd did. I don't think the verdict will do that. Here's the frustration of trying police. It goes back for tens of years where police finally were being charged with violent crimes, but historically they're exonerated, they're acquitted. And, there was this turning point in America, Rodney King, where he was just brutalized by, I don't know how many freaking officers at the time. They just kept smashing him in the head, tasering him. And he was just, one guy against this freaking police department in LA County, I believe. And those police officers deserved to be convicted of assault because their level of force exceeded any reasonable level. It exceeded any training, any protocol. And yet they were all acquitted. They were acquitted in Simi Valley, where they got the trial moved out of LA. And the reason they got it moved, and it's relevant to what we're looking at now, is they got it moved because publicity had been so extensive. Rodney King's video had been shown over and over again. So the jury pool was tainted. Well, that's the problem with the Chauvin trial, with Floyd trial right now, is everybody saw the video. Everybody's heard in the news. They've seen interviews. There were a number of police chiefs around the country that said, this is just wrong. So what they've got to do now is they're not going to find anybody who doesn't know who George Floyd is out of the hundreds of people they'll call up. What they're going to try to do is find people that read the news, heard about it, but at some level, they decided that they needed to hear the evidence, not the news reports, not exclusively the video, before they can make a judgment. It's a nightmare for the both sides. It's a nightmare for the attorney, private defense attorney. Now, take into account, Rodney King's police officers were able to convince a judge to move their trial to Simi Valley, which was pro-police. It's a white police-oriented community. They stood a much better chance than they would have stood in LA County. With George Floyd, there's nowhere to go. You can't argue that if you move it over a county, that somehow the people will not. I mean, this blew up America, right? So there's no getting out of this county where they're in. So it'd be really interesting and very challenging. When I pick a jury, first off, we all want to seem personable. We don't want to turn off the jury before we've had a chance to turn them on. And I really want to ferret out like housewives. I hate housewives on criminal juries They tend to be very judgmental. They tend to have not as much global experience. So they tend to think of the world much more black and white, less gray. That's just the tendency in my experience. And so personally, I don't like housewives on my juries. I've said that here before. It shouldn't surprise you. Hi, Carla. So what's going to happen is, I tried to think, but not for long, how would I pick a jury? Jerry Spence is the master of jury selection. But it's not jury selection that he does so well as much as Vore Dyer. He's just masterful at asking the questions of the potential jurors and using them to teach all the jurors the case that he's presenting, the law, and how to walk into this arena as a juror, knowing that you're going to take an oath under God, that you are going to be fair and impartial. You're going to listen to the evidence and only the evidence in making a determination about guilt or innocence. It takes a smart person to stand in the middle of that arena. And because, for instance, you'll ask somebody a question and you'll get a pretty negative answer. By negative answer, I mean you might ask about how they feel about somebody who's been accused of a crime. And they may say to you, well, if they've been accused, I would think that they're probably guilty because police officers wouldn't arrest somebody who's not guilty. Now, you kind of sit there and you're like, well, I'm going to get rid of that person, right? That would be your natural inclination. But I watched Jerry Spence, and he takes that person, and if he can't flip them back the other way, it doesn't matter. What he does is he engages them and talks about fairness and talks about duty. And what he does is he uses that juror to educate the other ones what is really the right path for a juror. And he's faced juries, very ugly juries. I don't know that anybody has been up against a jury as will be up against in the George Floyd case. I don't know that you could find an incident. Man, I think it just would be hard to find one that was so it was such a cataclysmic event. And I don't know how either side is going to navigate it. I do know that they've provided every juror, potential juror, I should say, with a 14-page questionnaire because they feel, both sides apparently feel that about if they fill out all these questions, and I don't know what the questions, I haven't seen the questionnaire, they've already struck, of the first 40, they struck 16 without even meeting them. Just both sides read the answers that were provided in the questionnaire and decided, oh, heck no. Maybe it's what magazines they read. Maybe it's something they said about criminals or about police or whatever it is. I think the police are scum. The prosecution's going to say, judge, and the defense, if they're saying, I think George Floyd was on drugs or whatever, right? So there's man, that's going to be a tough road to hoe. And I don't think anybody can predict the outcome of this case at this time, as you can never when it's a police officer or police officers on trial. By the way, there are other police officers who will be tried. I believe there's 2 or 3 others, but they don't have to be tried together because they may have separate defenses. Typically, the guy that does the killing, whether it's a gangbanger or a cop, everybody else wants to be away from him. They want him tried separately, and so they will do everything they can legally to separate themselves from that trial. That trial is perilous because that's the one that's going to be most emotional, most prejudicial. It's going to be inflamed. It's going to be inflamed. And that's true of any kind of homicide case. Somebody does the killing, but it's oftentimes that when somebody commits a homicide, a homicide is just a killing. It's not a determination of guilt. A murder means there's guilt, right? It was unlawful homicide. Self-defense is a lawful homicide. So a homicide is pretty emotional. And when people are brought in, um, it's going to be, it's hard for it not to be gut wrenching, right? Anyways, I don't know where I was going. I just thought I'd throw that out. Chris, well, welcome, and I hope you brought Becky with you. So we have a good crew here so far. Um, so this let me just wrap up what I was saying about trials. When you're picking this jury, 12 people who you got one chance to talk to them before the end. That's the voir dire. That's if the judge in that jurisdiction allows voir dire. Otherwise, the judge is going to do it, which is worthless. You don't know anything about your jurors by the time the judge is finished. Next, they're impaneled. The 12 and the alternates are impaneled. That means they take the oath, the oath of office. And amongst the admonitions they're given is they're not to have any contact with any of the parties, including the lawyers. So I don't even say good morning to them myself, and I don't think I doubt most lawyers say good morning to any juror. And so when you go to a courthouse, criminal or otherwise, once somebody has been sworn in as a juror, they're given usually a sticker or a badge that says they're juror. And the reason for that, above all else, is communication must be limited. I can't even get in an elevator with a juror and talk to another lawyer about my case. I would be in trouble with the judge and with the bar association if I were to discuss any element of the case. You have situations where a lawyer walks into a toilet with somebody, his client or another lawyer or his investigator, and he's talking about the trial, and here comes a juror out of a stall. Boom, you got a problem, man. So you got no communication. Even eye contact really becomes something you probably should just avoid. Yeah, I usually smile because I don't want to think I'm a jerk. And that's it. Quick smile, move on. They're going to sit there, and so much of the trial is mundane, typically, but more so, stuff goes on in a trial that the juror doesn't have access to, even though it's taking place in the trial. I'll give you an example. So, um, the prosecution brings up something that I believe was inappropriate, probably not admissible. So I'm going to object. Your Honor, I object. What's your objection? It's hearsay. The judge does not want to have an extensive conversation about my objection in front of the jury. He does one of two things. Usually, he just calls everybody up to the bench, and we sit there and we whisper our arguments back and forth, and the judge rules. That's if he didn't rule already. Typically, they're quick to rule from the bench. They want to keep things moving, so they don't have too many what we call sidebar. But there are a lot of sidebars in a trial, especially a long trial, and the jury is precluded from hearing any of it. Sometimes they will make the jury leave the room for some arguments that are going to be either weighty, or lengthy, or whatever. So the jury is constantly wondering what's going on. Why? What's that objection? Oh, that objection was overruled. You know, and the judge, by the way, explains a lot of this up front, says, there's going to be moments in the trial, you're not going to have contact with the lawyers. The lawyers are not to have contact with you. You're not to read the newspaper, watch TV, or anything having to do with this trial. You're supposed to only come here and listen to the evidence and then weigh the evidence only admitted at trial. You may have read in the newspaper about trials that were overturned because it turned out some juror was not only reading about it, but coming into the jury room before they began each day and telling people stuff that they read. Or I talked to my friend. My friend's a cop, and he works in that department, and he said, "Oh man, jury tainted. If it gets out, it's going to be a mistrial, right?" So the jury's got a. They're actually they got their own trick bag sitting there for days on end, sometimes weeks on end, and half of what's going on is completely unknown to them. And then you really want to remind them at the end, when they go out to make a determination, you're always going to remind them of their oath that they and they alone, not the judge, not the lawyers, not nobody, just the 12 individuals that are impaneled as jurors are going to be able to render a verdict. That's a big something. It's a big burden to put on somebody, and it's necessary. And you hope that the freaking jurors are paying attention, because you have instances where somebody got convicted, and when you interview the jurors, they're like, well, some of us were thinking not guilty, but I'll tell you, as the days went by, that is the days of rendering a verdict, people are getting mad at us because they had tickets to leave town, or they had birthday celebrations they wanted to get, whatever it is. And people succumb or submit to the pressure and change their vote. So it's so many perils. By the way, if the jury asks a question, let's say they want to review something, they don't remember. So, excuse me, I'm podcasting here. So the jury may want to revisit some evidence, or they may want an explanation of something they're not entitled to have explained. It took place. I asked a question of the witness. Maybe their answer seemed ambiguous, not to me, because I have too much knowledge of the case, somebody who has no knowledge. So when they go back to for their verdict to weigh the evidence, they may send out a question to the judge, and the judge will first off has to tell us there was a question. That's number one. Number two, the judge will often say, this question came out of the jury room. I'm just going to tell them they need to rely upon the evidence only that they heard or saw at the trial. Boom. If it's something he thinks is worthy, he now asks everybody, what do you think? How do you think we should answer this? And it's not uncommon for the three minds, that is the prosecution, defense, and judge, to get together and craft a response and send it in. And it's usually, it's not a definitive response, because you got to be careful what you say. So it kind of almost raises as many questions as it may answer. And then they come back with the verdict, and then you see it in the news. I mean, you see it in TV, not in the news, but, do you want to, does either side want to poll the jury? So after they've given their verdict, they say not guilty. If it's guilty, I'm going to ask them to poll the jury, just in a slight chance that of the 12 people, somebody will suddenly say, yeah, no, I don't mean to say guilty. You never know if you don't ask, right? So you ask. And then I get a chance to talk to the jurors legally. But a judge who's not particularly interested in hanging around often goes and says, well, you could talk to the lawyers. They have a right to ask questions, but you have a right not to be here and answer them. So if you want to go home, you go home. If you want to wait around, you wait around. I like talking to jurors. I get a lot out of, I like the feedback. Even when I lose, I usually ask the judge to let me interview the jury and ask them why they came up with the verdict they did. What was the compelling evidence for them? You never know. Maybe a case gets overturned on appeal or something, and they get another shot at it, and you're like, you know how you screwed up that first time? Don't screw up the second time. All right, 30 minutes of law. Do you feel enlightened and educated, or are you like, oh my God, he just did it again? How many times is he going to give some lecture on the law, for freak's sake? You got to go with what you know, and I know the law. I know it much better than I let on, because what I know about the law is the structure, right? A lot of lawyers don't quite get the structure. Their focus is very much on this process. They're very good with what they call the rules of evidence, or the rules of procedure, civil rules of procedure, criminal rules of procedure, that govern how the trial goes down. I'm really bad at that stuff. I get in trouble all the time because I'm doing something that's technically maybe not permitted, and I get my hand slapped by the judge at the urging of the prosecution. But what I do get is the fundamental policies that govern the origination of the law. And I very well understand the need, the absolute need for every trial to be simplified, from the police reports, the forensic, the coroner's report, um, any scientific evidence that's introduced, whether it's gunshot residue or trajectory of a bullet wound or whatever it is. I understand that people, the jurors, do not have an opportunity to ask questions. And actually, there are some jurisdictions where they can, but typically they can't. So if you let something you think that was quasi-scientific or scientific, if you let it slip by without simplifying it, it may be beneficial to you, but not if you don't simplify it. Not if you don't find a way to break it down, man. You have to assume that the jurors, in their inability to ask questions, are sitting there scratching their head. And in my trials that I've done, I've never found it beneficial to have people confused. I've always thought I've got to communicate clearly, right? So I'm really good at that particular element of the trial, which is why when you see me do any kind of felony trial, you won't see me lately, but you will see a second attorney. So you'll see me doing a lot of the talking. You'll see another attorney sitting next to me, talking sometimes, taking a lot of notes and stuff. And if you're wondering, that's the person I either hired, who hired me, who's trying to keep me out of trouble and keep us moving forward by keeping me out of trouble with objections when objections are made, helping guide me out of the ones that hurt me and winning the ones that help me. And it wouldn't be uncommon for the person sitting with me to be the one that likes to go back and talk with the judge about some legal minutia that's being introduced into the trial. My only effort when I'm at trial is to take the fact pattern that I have and convert it into an acquittal, a legitimate acquittal. No tricks, nothing up my sleeve. That's not the deal. The deal is when a fact pattern works in your favor, but for the fact that the cops already created a fact pattern that's supposed to damage you, but I know the cops aren't that smart and they make a lot of stuff up. So that's yet another anatomy. We've done anatomy of a trial on several occasions. I've talked about direct testimony, cross-examination. I've talked about various elements. I don't remember talking this extensively about juries, though. But I thought that this trial that's emerging as we speak today is going to be capturing a lot of the news. It has. And that, you should kind of grasp what is going on. All right. So, moving along. Revolution, evolution, sound control, shooting rockets to the moon, kids growing up too soon. And everybody says, now that I understand this right, let me take it to the mic. This revolution has just begun. Now that I understand this right, let me take it to the mic. This revolution has just begun. I hope you never heard of Tricky. You know why? Because I want to be the one that introduced you to Tricky. I want to be the one that opened the door and said, can you hear that? It's like opening the door and saying, listen to the birds outside. Have you heard the birds? To somebody who typically is either so busy or so inundated with other stimulation that they oftentimes miss out on another sound. I'm hoping that at least for some of you, this introduction of Tricky or any of the other music is kind of like opening a window or opening a door and urging you to listen, to get quiet and listen and hear the sound of birds, of singers, of anthems that are speaking to our situation. You know, I mean, there's that one, you left enough music and stuff, kept you busy all day. All right. So, there's one, there's a company, God, too many crickets some days. Muse, remember, I tried to nominate them to be, I urged the public to adopt Uprising as kind of the theme for when we were objecting to Wall Street. I forget what the name of that movement was, but I thought this was perfect. I thought that, oh, no, you don't. Don't give me this. Shush. And skip ads. And you remember this one, right? I mean, this was a protest song, man. This was the 60s and the 90s, right? Or even 2000s. I don't know what it was. Let me jump ahead.
Is in bloom, the transmissions will resume. I try to keep us all down and hope that we will never see the truth around. Another promise, another scene, another package like to keep us trapped in greed. A green belts wrapped around our minds, an endless red tape to keep the truth confined.
Victorious. Yeah, baby. Okay? Know what I'm saying? Revolution. Evolution. Sound control. Shooting rockets to the moon. Kids growing up too soon. All right. So that's my kind of, so there's two kinds of music I bring here. One is just a stroll down memory lane for you, right? Kind of trigger cool memories. And the other, as I say, and I mean this from the heart, man, opening the window and letting the sound come in to your life, to something that, connects with you, just like the podcast is intended to connect with you. Sometimes I'm deeper than I let on, but not necessarily. So connection, community, that go back a year ago when this started. The pandemic started. I started podcasting, and the pandemic had set in, and this was my reaction to it. And the whole thing was community, connection. And man, I can't sit around with you guys at the table and kicking it, smoking weed, whatever the hell people do, having a drink. I don't do either. But the point is, I can't stimulate you in the ways that maybe normally you do when folks just kicking it at somebody's house, right? Hey, come on over. You walk in and, it's not necessarily a party. It's a gathering, maybe 10, 11 people, and you're sitting around, kind of a circle. And, sometimes you're just talking to the person next to you for a little while. Other times you're part of a bigger conversation. Well, today you're part of a conversation that's, the whole room is engaged. And the way to get your attention, either to really have some good rap for you or to have some music for you, something that will stimulate you. And as I always like to say, makes you feel like it was worth showing up for 45 minutes or some portion of 45 minutes to connect. Man, the longer this goes on, And the more disjointed the world is getting as we're dividing up and going in separate ways, right? Let's order a pizza. I love that, Debbie. Will you and AJ podcast together again? Certainly not in the time of the pandemic. I don't know what will happen, Kathy, as far as it goes, because the podcast eventually would have to go back to 1 day a week, right? Because that's what AJ and I did. It was, I think it was an hour. I just fell into this thing doing it regular. I think, because the pandemic led me to believe a couple of things. Here was a certain assumptions that I made during the time of the pandemic. More people were at home than ever before. Most people weren't in their cars or at the office. So if I was here at 6 p.m., I could capture people at home by their computers and interest them in and that people were suffering from this isolation created by the pandemic. So those assumptions are the underpinning of a daily podcast. There's just no way, unless AJ and I got paid, by a radio station to do as frequent a podcast. AJ stays busy. I don't know what she does, by the way. Rose loves pizza. Chris had pizza. Debbie wants to order pizza. I'm going to pay attention that pizza stimulates reaction and interaction. By the way, I love pizza. Somebody who's not here, posted a thing about New York thin dish versus Chicago deep dish. And it was kind of a knock on deep dish. It was like, listing the two things. You can fold a New York pizza. Chicago pizza is a casserole. You can get a slice of New York pizza. Chicago pizza is like a casserole. And so I just put down, I'm so down with Chi-Town deep dish pizza. That's, to me, the only reason I don't eat a deep dish pizza frequently. Frequently, two reasons. One, I'm in Dallas. I'm not in Chicago. We don't have that much. Two, it is freaking fattening. So in my freezer, I have a lot of pizzas. I would say at this moment, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I have at least 12 frozen pizzas waiting at any one moment for me to chow down. And the reason I don't eat pizza every night, a different type of pizza every night, is because I'd be a fat motherfucker, boy. Ooh, good God, honey. So Rachel had pizza too. Yeah, Debbie, that's funny you say pizza music. So across the street from me, I've talked about this in the past. One of the earliest Black families to move into my neighborhood on the south side was called the Highlands. We had a single family dwelling, and a dentist, his wife, and his 5 boys, no girls, moved in across the street. And we had at the end of the block was Italian Fiesta Pizza, 71st and Bennett. And so I would frequently, because I had money. Where did I get money? I don't know how I had money. Anyways, I would order from Italian Fiesta this regular thin dish Chicago pizza, have it delivered, and go over to their house and play Motown. They were 5 black boys. I was a young white boy, and that's where I started getting indoctrinated into black culture, which, by the way, resulted in me becoming a young black boy around the age of 15. For those of you that knew me well, I wrote a blog, How I Was a Young Black Boy. That started in South Shore. And then when I moved to Hyde Park and I just ran away from home, and I found out that, the safest place for me to hide was primarily the inner city. One, it hid me from the cops and my family, but 2, it kept the predators off of me because, I'm around with some really crazy, dangerous people who secured my safety while I was still too small to protect myself. Your podcast beats the hell out of the commute. I hadn't thought of that. One more reason to appreciate you. And you're most welcome. Thank you. Kathy and Says there ain't no good pizza in Florida, and I believe that. We don't have great pizzas here. I spend most of my money on frozen pizzas. I get Kroger's Select brand. It's their upgraded brand, and some other stuff. But usually what I do, by the way, I take a frozen pizza out. It could be a cheese or a cheese and veggie. I never ate a veggie pizza when I was young. I sprinkle veggies on it now, and then I sprinkle some more mozzarella on top, and then I cook it. So it's healthier. I'll sprinkle a bunch of spinach or broccoli or something on it and eat it that way, because otherwise I'm just eating pure fat. So I like to make it healthy fat. Anyways, it's time to go. I've overstayed my welcome. Not much up in a tundra either. Carla is apparently not impressed with the pizza in the northeast part of the United States. So I was just fascinated a minute ago by the way I could shift my hand. Like, if somehow that meant something, I'm in a position to communicate it. But it means nothing. You know what I mean? But it was fun checking it out before I brought it before my heart and bowed my head and took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and practiced metta so that I could think to myself, and if you would also think to yourselves, may I be happy, healthy, and free from harm. May I be free from anger, anxiety, and fear. May this practice lead me to greater peace and comfort in my life. May my mother and father, wherever they may be, and all my living relatives and all my friends, be happy, be healthy, and free from harm. May they too find a path that leads them to peace and comfort. To those persons I find troublesome, difficult, I harbor ill will towards, in this moment, I send them loving kindness, goodwill, compassion. May they be happy, healthy, free from harm. May they also be living their lives in this moment with peace, comfort, and even joy. And to all living beings throughout the entire universe, if you've done nothing up until this moment, imagine your heart opening up and sending out this radiant light and illuminating the universe and all its living beings with goodwill and kindness. May all living beings be happy, healthy, free from harm. May all living beings be safe, comfortable, and at peace. Satu, Satu, Satu. Well, thank you, Mark and Ann, and Rose, and Lisa, and John. You were sneaking around out there. Kathy, Carla, Joan, Rose, Chris, and Becky, and Rachel, and Kathy. I'm just scrolling now. There was too much activity. Rose, Chris, Becky, Debbie, and listen, if I missed anybody, Lisa, I want to say this. If you are here and I'm not, if you're somebody who tuned in after this was long gone, but still residing on the internet, feel free to leave a comment anytime. You could leave a comment at 2 a.m. I'll get it eventually and I will reply, or if it doesn't require a response. The point is, this thing lives its own life in perpetuity, and you're welcome to criticize it in the middle of the night or enjoy it in the middle of the night. I'm powerless, baby. But I'll tell you what, power to the people. Revolution.